What happens when one of comedy's most controversial legends sits down with one of daytime television's sharpest voices? Tension, confrontation, and a moment that nobody in that studio saw coming. Before we get into what went down between Chevy Chase and Joy Behar, make sure you subscribe to this channel and drop a comment below telling me your thoughts on this whole situation. Now, let's get into it. The VieW stage was set for what was supposed to be a light-hearted conversation about Chevy Chase's legacy in comedy. The audience settled in, expecting the usual banter, maybe some nostalgic stories about Saturday Night Live, perhaps a few laughs about his film career. What they got instead was something entirely different. A clash that would dominate headlines and spark debates across social media for days to come. Joy Behar kicked things off with what seemed like a harmless enough question. Chevy, welcome to TheView. You have had quite the career. From Saturday Night Live to the vacation movies, you have made a lot of people laugh over the years. But I have to ask, looking back at some of your comedy, do you ever think about how different the landscape is now? I mean, some of the jokes that flew back then would not exactly get the same reception today. Chevy leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Well, Joy, comedy has always been about pushing boundaries. That was the whole point. We were trying to make people uncomfortable sometimes because that's where the real laughs come from. If you are just playing it safe all the time, you are not really doing comedy. You are doing something else. Joy nodded. But there was something in her expression that suggested she was not quite satisfied with that answer. Sure, but there is a difference between pushing boundaries and just being offensive. Don't you think? Amelia have had conversations on this show about how comedy can sometimes punch down rather than punch up. When you look back at some of those sketches, some of those jokes, do you ever cringe a little bit? The smile on Chevy's face tightened just slightly. Cringe? No, I don't cringe. I think people today are looking at comedy from 40, 50 years ago through a lens that didn't exist back then. We were breaking ground. We were doing things that had never been done on television before. Saturday Night Live changed the game entirely. If people today want to go back and judge everything by modern standards, well, that is their choice. But I am not going to apologize for making people laugh. Whoopi Goldberg jumped in trying to smooth things over. I think what Joy is getting at, Chevy, is that comedy evolves. What we found funny then, we might look at differently now. That does not mean it wasn't funny at the time, but context matters. Chevy turned to Whoopi, his tone still relatively measured, but with an edge creeping in. Context absolutely matters. And the context is that we were comedians doing comedy. We were not politicians. We were not trying to teach people lessons. We were trying to make them laugh, and we did. Millions of people laughed. That is the context. Joy was not backing down. But comedy does teach people things whether you intended to or not. When you are on a platform like Saturday Night Live, when you are in movies that millions of people watch, you are influencing culture. You are shaping how people think about certain groups, certain ideas. That comes with responsibility, doesn't it? Chevy's jaw tightened. Responsibility. My responsibility was to be funny. That was the job. Make people laugh. And I did that job better than most people ever have. Now, decades later, everyone wants to go back and dissect every single joke, every single sketch, looking for something to be offended by. It is exhausting. Honestly, the audience had gone quiet. The energy in the room shifting from anticipation to tension. Joy pressed forward. It is not about being offended for the sake of being offended. Chevy, it is about recognizing that some humor was built on stereotypes, on making certain people the butt of the joke in ways that were harmful. Asian jokes, gay jokes, jokes about women. These things had real impacts on real people. Chevy leaned forward now, his voice rising slightly. And those real people were laughing too. Joy. They were laughing because they understood it was comedy. They understood we were playing with taboos, with subjects that made people uncomfortable. And that is what comedy does. It takes the uncomfortable and makes it absurd. Makes it something we can laugh at together. That is the whole point. Joy shook her head. But were we laughing together, or were we laughing at? That is the question. When you make a joke at the expense of a marginalized group, when you are a white man in a position of power and influence, it is not the same as when someone from that community makes a joke about their own experience. Chevy's face flushed. So now we are categorizing who gets to make what jokes based on their identity. That is not comedy. That is censorship. Comedy works because anyone can make fun of anything. The moment you start saying this person can joke about this, but that person cannot, you have killed comedy entirely. Sunny host interjected, her voice calm but firm. I don't think it is about censorship, Chevy. I think it is about awareness. Being aware of your privilege, being aware of your platform, and being thoughtful about how you use it. Chevy turned to Sunny. His frustration now clearly visible. Privilege. There it is. You know what my privilege was? Working harder than everyone else. Being funnier than everyone else. Earning my spot on that stage. Week after week, I didn't get handed anything. I worked for every laugh, every bit of success I had. And now people want to reduce it all down to privilege. Joy jumped back in. Nobody is saying you didn't work hard, Chevy, but you did have advantages that other people didn't have. That is just a fact. And acknowledging that doesn't diminish your talent or your work ethic. Chevy's voice was sharp. Now, what advantages, Joy? Tell me specifically what advantages I had that made it so easy for me. Joy did not hesitate. You were a white man in America in the 1970s, working in an industry dominated by white men. You didn't have to worry about being stereotyped or TYP cast in the same way a person of color would have. You didn't have to deal with the same barriers to entry. That is not a criticism. That is just reality. Chevy stood up slightly in his seat before sitting back down. His agitation clear. You know what? I didn't come here to be lectured about privilege and barriers. I came here to talk about comedy, to talk about a career that spans decades, and instead I am being put on trial for jokes I made when you were probably making similar jokes yourself. The audience gasped audibly. Joy's eyes widened. Excuse me, what are you implying? Chevy gestured broadly. I am saying everyone in comedy made edgy jokes back then. Everyone pushed boundaries. But now some people get to rewrite their history, act like they were always on the right side of everything while others get dragged through the mud for doing the exact same thing. Joy's voice rose. I have never claimed to be perfect, Chevy. But I have also grown. I have learned. I have listened to people when they said certain things were hurtful. That is called growth. What you are doing right now is defensiveness. And honestly, it is proving the point that maybe you have not grown at all. The tension was now palpable. Every person in the studio leaning forward, unsure where this was heading. Chevy's face was red, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. So, because I won't apologize for making people laugh. Because I won't bend the knee to this new wave of outrage culture, that means I haven't grown. That is absurd. Joy leaned toward him. It is not outrage culture to ask people to be better, to do better. It is not outrage culture to say that words matter and jokes matter and the way we treat people matters. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe that is something you need to examine. Chevy looked away, shaking his head, his lips pressed into a thin line. When he looked back at Joy, his voice was low but intense. You know what makes me uncomfortable, Joy? This entire conversation. The fact that I cannot talk about comedy without being interrogated about every single choice I made decades ago. The fact that nothing is ever good enough for people like you. The words hung in the air. Joy's expression hardened. People like me. And what exactly does that mean? Chevy exhaled sharply, realizing his words had landed harder than he intended. I didn't mean it like that. What I mean is people who are constantly looking for something to criticize, who can't just accept that comedy was different back then. Joy was not buying it. No, you said people like me. So, let's be clear about what you meant. Do you mean women? Do you mean people who actually care about how humor affects society? Which people are you talking about? Chevy rubbed his face with his hand, frustration radiating from him. I mean people who have made a career out of being perpetually offended on behalf of others. People who act as moral authorities deciding what is acceptable and what isn't. When comedy has never been about morality, it has been about freedom, about saying the unpeable. Alyssa Farah Griffin spoke up trying to redirect. Chevy, I think we can all agree that comedy should have freedom. But don't you think there is value in comedians listening when audiences say something didn't land right or hurt people? Chevy turned to her, his tone slightly less combative. Of course, there is value in listening, but there is a difference between listening and cap. There is a difference between evolving and erasing your entire body of work because a vocal minority decides they have a problem with it. I have spent my whole life making people laugh, and I am proud of that work. All of it. Joy was not letting him off the hook. All of it, really. There is not a single joke, not a single sketch you look back on and think maybe that was too far. Maybe that actually did hurt people unnecessarily. Chevy met her gaze directly. Too far. Comedy is supposed to go too far. Joy, that is the job description. You go as far as you can until you find the line, and then you cross it because that is where the biggest laughs are. That is where the truth lives. In the uncomfortable places, Joy leaned back, crossing her arms. You keep talking about truth, but whose truth? The truth of the person making the joke or the truth of the person being joked about, because those are not always the same thing. Chevy's voice grew more animated. The truth of human experience, the absurdity of existence. That is what comedy explores. When I made jokes about different groups, different types of people, it was never about hatred. It was about highlighting the ridiculousness of our differences, of our hang-ups, of the things we take too seriously. Joy shook her head slowly. But Chvy, you are not just some neutral observer highlighting absurdity. You are a person with power, with influence, and when you make certain jokes, you are reinforcing ideas about people, whether you intend to or not. When you make an Asian person the punchline, you are telling audiences it is okay to see Asian people as punchlines. That has consequences. Chevy slapped his hand on the armrest. No, I am telling audiences it is okay to laugh. That is all. Audiences are smart enough to separate a joke from reality. They don't need you or anyone else to protect them from comedy. They can decide for themselves what is funny and what isn't. Joy's voice rose. Nobody is talking about protecting anyone from comedy. Chevy, we are talking about basic empathy. We are talking about asking yourself before you make a joke. Who gets hurt by this? And is the laugh worth it? Chevy stood up from his seat. His body language defensive. Every joke hurts someone. Joy. That is the nature of humor. Someone is always the butt of the joke. If you are worried about hurting feelings, you shouldn't be in comedy. The audience murmured. Some gasps, some nervous laughter. Joy stood as well, facing him across the table. Sit down, Chevy. We are having a conversation here. Chevy remained standing. Are we? Because it feels like an ambush. It feels like I was invited here under false pretenses so you could spend an hour telling me everything that is wrong with me and my career. Joy's voice was firm. You were invited here to have a real conversation, and real conversations are not always comfortable. If you can't handle being challenged on your views, maybe you are not as tough as you think you are. Chevy pointed at her, his voice sharp. Don't question my toughness. I have been in this industry longer than most people at this table have been alive. I have faced real criticism, real challenges. Not this performative outrage nonsense. Whoopi stood up now, her voice commanding. Okay, everybody needs to take a breath here. Chevy, nobody is attacking you. We are having a discussion about how comedy has changed and how we all need to think about our impact. Chevy turned to Whoopi. With all due respect, Whoopi, you were part of that era too. You made edgy jokes. You pushed boundaries. So why is it that I am the one being grilled here? Why is it that my career is the one being put under a microscope? Whoopi's expression was steady because you are the one sitting in that chair right now. And because you are the one who seems unwilling to even consider that maybe, just maybe, some things could have been done differently. Chevy laughed bitterly. Could have been done differently. Sure, I could have played it safe, made boring jokes, never taken any risks, and then where would comedy be? That show exists because people like me were willing to take chances. Joy sat back down, her voice calmer now, but no less pointed. And we are grateful for what Saturday Night Live brought to television. But gratitude doesn't mean blind acceptance. It doesn't mean we can't also acknowledge that some of what was done was problematic. Chevy threw his hands up. Problematic, that word. Everything is problematic. Now, you know what is problematic? Not being able to have a sense of humor anymore. Not being able to laugh at ourselves, at each other, at life. Joy leaned forward again. So, you are saying the problem is not you. It is everyone else. It is society that has changed for the worse. Not that maybe you need to reconsider your approach. Chevy's eyes flashed. I am saying that comedy is dying. Joy, and it is dying because people like you have decided that feelings are more important than laughter. You have decided that protecting people from discomfort is more important than freedom of expression. Joy's voice was ice cold. Now people like me have decided that human dignity matters, that representation matters, that the words we use and the jokes we make have power, and we should use that power responsibly. Chevy stepped back from the table, and there it is. Responsibility, control. That is what this is really about. You want to control what people laugh at, what they think is funny, what they are allowed to say. Joy stood again, her voice rising. It is about accountability, Chevy. It is about recognizing that you don't get to say whatever you want without consequences. Actions have consequences. Chevy moved toward the edge of the set. Consequences. Like being hauled onto a talk show and lectured about every joke I made 40 years ago, like having my entire career reduced to a list of things I should apologize for. Joy followed him with her eyes. If the shoe fits, Chevy, if you have made jokes that hurt people, yes, maybe you should think about that. Maybe you should consider apologizing instead of acting like the victim here. Chevy whirled around. I am not a victim, and I am not apologizing for making people laugh. I won't do it. I don't care how many talk shows I have to walk off of. I will not apologize for my comedy. The audience was completely silent now. Joy took a step closer. Then maybe you should walk, Chevy. If you can't have this conversation like an adult, if you can't even entertain the possibility that you might have been wrong about something, then maybe there is nothing left to talk about. Chevy stared at her for a long moment, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. You want me to walk? Is that what this is? Joy's voice was steady. Nobody brought you here to humiliate you. We brought you here to talk, but you were the one who turned this into a fight. Chevy looked around at the other hosts, at the audience, at the cameras. His face was flushed, his hands trembling slightly. This is unbelievable. This whole thing is unbelievable. Whoopi tried again to defuse the situation. Chevy, just sit back down. We can continue this conversation in a more productive way. But Chevy was shaking his head. His jaw set. No, I don't think we can. I don't think there is any conversation to be had here. When the entire premise is that I need to confess my sins and beg for forgiveness. Joy's expression hardened. Nobody asked you to beg for anything, but a little humility, a little acknowledgement that times have changed and maybe you should change with them. That would go a long way. Chevy turned back to face her fully. Humility. You want to talk to me about humility. You sit here on your platform every single day telling America what to think, who to vote for, what is right and what is wrong. And you want to lecture me about humility. Joy's voice rose to match his. I give my opinion. Chevy, that is my job, but I don't pretend that my words don't have impact. I don't hide behind the excuse of just trying to make people laugh when I say something hurtful. Chevy took another step toward the edge of the stage. And I don't hide behind fake moral superiority while tearing other people down. At least when I made jokes, I owned what I was doing. I didn't pretend I was doing the world some great service. Sunny host shook her head. Chevy, we are talking about actual things you said and did. Actual jokes that were broadcast to millions of people. Chevy's voice cracked slightly with emotion. You know what? I have had enough of this. I came here thinking we could have a genuine conversation about comedy, about the work I have done. Instead, I walked into an interrogation where every single thing I have ever said or done is being used against me. Joy crossed her arms. If you feel like you are being interrogated, maybe that says something about the position you are defending. Maybe if you have to work this hard to justify your past behavior, it is worth examining why that is. Chevy's face contorted with frustration. Or maybe it says something about the people doing the interrogating. Maybe it says something about a culture that would rather tear down legends than celebrate them, that would rather find fault than find humor. Joy jumped back in. The cultural impact includes the offense, Chevy. It includes the harm. You don't get to cherry-pick which parts of your legacy count. It is all part of the same picture. Chevy's voice dropped lower, more intense. Then I want no part of this picture. I want no part of a world where comedy has to apologize for existing, where every joke needs a disclaimer. Every bit of humor needs to be approved by the sensitivity police. Joy stepped closer to the table between them. Then maybe you are in the wrong era, Chevy. Maybe the world has moved on without you. And instead of blaming everyone else for that, you should look in the mirror. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Chevy's face went pale, then red again. Moved on without me, right? Because all those people streaming Saturday Night Live reruns, all those fans who still love the vacation movies, they have all moved on. Have they? Joy did not back down. Having fans doesn't mean you are right. Having people who laugh at your old work doesn't mean that work was beyond criticism. Plenty of problematic things are popular. Chevy, that doesn't make them okay. Chevy pointed directly at Joy now, his finger shaking. You know what your problem is, Joy. You have confused being loud with being right. You have confused having a platform with having wisdom. Just because you can say something doesn't mean you should. Joy's eyes flashed. And your problem, Chevy, is that you can dish it out, but you can't take it. You built a career on making fun of other people, but the second someone challenges you, you fall apart. That is not strength. That is fragility. Whoopi stood up again, her voice firm. Okay, that is enough from both of you. This has gone too far. But neither Joy nor Chevy was listening anymore. Chevy shook his head violently. Fragility. I am standing here defending my entire life's work against people who have decided that everything that came before their enlightenment was wrong. That is not fragility. That is conviction. Joy leaned across the table. Conviction in what, Chevy? In your right to make jokes at other people's expense without ever having to think about the consequences. That is not conviction. That is stubbornness. That is arrogance. Chevy took several steps back, his whole body tense. I don't have to stand here and listen to this. I don't have to subject myself to this kind of character assassination. Joy's voice followed him. So that is it. You were just going to run away when things get uncomfortable. I thought you were the guy who pushed boundaries, who wasn't afraid of making people uncomfortable. Chevy spun around one more time. There is a difference between making people uncomfortable with comedy and being personally attacked on national television. Joy. And you know that you are just trying to get a reaction, trying to create a moment for your ratings. Joy laughed, but there was no humor in it. For the ratings, Chevy, you are the one making a scene right now. You are the one who can't handle a simple conversation about accountability. Chevy pulled off his microphone. The gesture sudden and definitive, the sound tech looked panicked, unsure what to do. Accountability. That word gets thrown around so much it has lost all meaning. What you really mean is submission. What you really mean is conform or be destroyed. Whoopi moved toward him. Chevy, please just take a breath. But Chevy was already backing away from the table, his microphone dangling from his hand. I am done here. I am done with this conversation. I am done with this show, and I am done pretending that any of this is about genuine dialogue. Joy called after him. So you are walking off. You are really going to walk off TheView because you can't handle being challenged. Chevy stopped at the edge of the stage, turning back one final time. I am walking off because I have more self-respect than to sit here and be lectured by someone who thinks moral grandstanding is the same thing as morality. You want to make me the villain in your little narrative? Fine, but I won't help you do it. Joy's voice cut through the tension one more time. Your dignity, Chevy. Your dignity walked out the door the moment you started acting like a petulant child because someone dared to question you. That was the final straw. Chevy dropped the microphone on the floor with a loud thud that echoed through the studio. You know what, Joy? You can have the last word. You can have your moral victory, but you cannot have my respect, and you cannot have my apology. Enjoy your show. And with that, Chevy Chase turned and walked off the stage, leaving the host sitting in stunned silence. The audience unsure whether to gasp or applaud, and the cameras capturing every second of the most dramatic exit in TheView's history. Whoopi was the first to speak, her voice measured, but clearly shaken. Well, that just happened. Joy sat back down slowly, her face unreadable. Yes, it did. The audience began to react. Some clapping, some sitting in shocked silence. The energy in the room completely fractured by what had just transpired. As the show cut to commercial, the incident would dominate social media within minutes, with clips of the confrontation going viral across every platform. If you enjoyed this deep dive into what happened between Chevy Chase and Joy Behar on TheView, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. What do you think about this whole situation? Was Chevy right to walk off, or did Joy have a point about accountability and comedy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.